biggest lie about Miami is that cartels built it. The scarier truth is that they didn't need to because the machine was already waiting for their money. I'm Arturo, and this is Latin Laura, where we explore Latin America's history, mysteries, true crime, and local legends, always whispering intrigue. Subscribe for fresh revelations every week, perfect for your next campfire debate. Two men were killed in a mall liquor store in broad daylight, but the weapon that changed Miami was quieter than a gun. It was a cashier's check, clean paper, bank approved, perfectly respectable. The kind of little rectangle you slide across a closing table while everyone pretends the money has no memory. So let's ask the question people love to whisper under neon. Did cartel money build Miami? Not the cartoon version. Not every tower rises from cocaine dust. The real answer is darker, smarter, and much more Miami. Cartel money did not invent the city. It found a city already built to receive money, and then it taught that money how to disappear. Miami has always been a place where reality and fantasy shake hands before anyone checks the paperwork. From above, it looks like paradise. Turquoise water, white towers, palm trees, sun flashing off glass. But the land underneath remembers something older. Before the postcards, before the developers, before the railroad turned the coast into a promise, the Miami River and Biscayne Bay belonged to older worlds. The Tequesta lived here. Bahamian workers built here. Black neighborhoods breathed music and labor into the city. Cuban exile reshaped its language and politics. Miami was never empty. It was never just a swamp waiting for a rich man's dream. That matters because one of the most dangerous myths about Miami is that it has no history. Places with no history can be sold as blank paper. Places with memory ask harder questions. The railroad pushed south, developers looked at water and mud and saw profit, and the city learned its oldest trick, turning a fragile landscape into a fantasy someone could buy. At first, the desire was ordinary. People wanted warmth, trade, escape, a door to Latin America and the Caribbean. Then speculation arrived, wearing good shoes. Land changed hands, hotels rose, banks opened. The city started practicing the art of reinvention long before cocaine arrived. By the middle of the 1970s, Miami was already becoming something powerful, a hemispheric financial hinge. Special banking offices tied to foreign business were multiplying. Foreign deposits were growing fast. Latin American and Caribbean money already knew the route into South Florida. There was legitimate capital here. Exile savings, business money, tourism money, real estate money, trade money, family money crossing water and language. Cocaine did not build those pipes. But when the drug cash came, the pipes were already in the walls. Wait, notice this. The city did not have to become corrupt from nothing. It only had to become useful. And useful it became. By the late 1970s, Colombian cocaine profits were no longer a rumor moving through ports and airstrips. They were a river. A Dade County grand jury later said that by the summer of 1979, officials believed 3/4 of the cocaine and marijuana entering the United States was coming through South Florida. 3/4, not a leak, not a criminal side story, a flood. And when a flood enters a city, it does not ask the mayor for permission. It goes where the ground is low. In Miami, the low ground was not only geographic, it was institutional. The banks felt it first, or at least they should have. South Florida began showing strange cash surpluses, the kind normal tourism and restaurants could not explain. Federal officials saw cash signals that did not match the official city. Somewhere, money was entering faster than honest commerce could reasonably produce it. A Treasury-linked analysis traced about $108 million in suspicious deposits by suspected drug smugglers into Miami banks over roughly a year. That number is not the whole cocaine economy. It is a footprint in wet cement. And once you see the footprint, you realize the animal was much larger than the print. This is where the movie version gets lazy. People imagine traffickers dumping bags of cash into construction sites like skyscrapers were poured with cocaine money instead of concrete. But laundering is rarely that dramatic. Laundering is patient. It puts on a tie. It learns the teller's name. It breaks big things into small things. It turns street cash into cashier's checks. It hides behind nominees. It passes through lawyer accounts. It buys a house, then improves it, then borrows against it, then uses the new loan to make the old money look like it was born again. The magic trick was not making money vanish. It was making dirty money look like ordinary ambition. So keep your eye on the cashier's check. It returns again and again like a little ghost. Cash walks into a bank in bags, boxes, stacks, rubber bands, sometimes even with counterfeit bills mixed into the pile. Then it walks out as paper that smells like legality. A cashier's check has no drama, no sirens, no speedboat. No blood is visible on the surface. But in Miami during the cocaine years, that little instrument could become a mask. It could cross a closing table, enter a deed, become a down payment, and settle into land. The city did not need to know everything. It only needed enough people willing not to ask. One of the clearest windows into this machinery was the Isaac Catan network. The name does not sound as famous as Escobar or Blanco, but for understanding Miami, it may be more useful. Catan and his associates moved money through Miami banking relationships, revealing how the system worked when legitimate institutions stopped acting as guardians and began acting as servants. At Great American Bank of Dade County, accounts were kept under nominee names. Couriers brought bags and boxes of cash into the bank lobby. Daily deposits could reach into the millions. Cashier's checks were issued. Names were falsified. Reports were not properly filed. Think about that image. Not a secret cave, not a jungle hideout, a bank lobby, fluorescent light, counters, forms, people in professional clothes pretending the obvious was mysterious. Some deposits reportedly contained counterfeit bills, and still the relationship continued. That detail is almost too honest. The money did not merely look suspicious because there was too much of it. Some of it was visibly rotten. Yet the institution treated the handlers like valuable customers. This is what corruption often looks like in real life. Not a villain laughing in the dark. A professional deciding the commission is more important than the question. Great American Bank later pleaded guilty to felony counts related to currency reporting failures and paid a fine of $500,000. Press accounts described the broader scandal as involving more than $94 million. But the number, as large as it is not the scariest part. The scariest part is the lesson. Traffickers did not always need to break into the respectable economy. Sometimes the respectable economy would open the door, take the deposit, and ask whether the customer wanted a receipt. The border between criminal money and clean money was not a wall. In Miami, too often, it was a counter. From there, the money walked into real estate. Land is perfect for secrets because land does not talk. A house can absorb cash without looking guilty. A lot can sit quietly. A mortgage can create paperwork. A refinance can make old money look like new money. A swimming pool can become part of the ritual. A kitchen extension, a fence, a roof, a dream home on a quiet street. These are not the images people expect when they hear cartel money, but the records whisper that this is exactly where much of the story lived, not only in towers, in houses, in lots, in neighborhoods where the paper owner and the true owner were not the same person. The Haro and Estevez case shows the spell almost step by step. Orlando Estevez wanted Miami area real estate. Lawyer Jose Haro helped place properties in Haro's name, while the money behind them came from cocaine proceeds. Cash was converted into cashier's checks, which were kept under the reporting threshold. Attorney trust accounts helped move the funds. Homes were bought. A red road lot was meant to become a dream home. Another property received major improvements, including a swimming pool. After arrests, backdated leases appeared, as if paperwork could travel backward in time and invent innocence. Wait, notice the transformation. Cocaine money did not just buy property, it bought a fake past. Think of the house not as a home, but as a mask. The dirty money did not arrive wearing a villain's face. It arrived quietly, broken into smaller pieces, turned into cashier's checks, passed through a lawyer's hands, and placed under another man's name. On paper, the property looked clean. A house, a lot, a mortgage, a future. But beneath the ink, the money still remembered where it came from. Then came the deeper trick. Improve the house, add the pool, build the dream home, turn cash into concrete, tile, walls, land, and once the property grows in value, sell it or borrow against it. Now the money returns, not as cocaine profit, but as real estate money. Bank money, respectable money. That was the ritual. Dirty cash walked into Miami as danger and came out wearing a deed. The house did not need to speak. The paperwork spoke for itself. And in a city hungry for growth, sometimes a signature was enough to make everyone pretend the ghost had disappeared. So that is why we have to be careful with the phrase cartel construction. The strongest evidence does not give us a clean list of famous skyline trophies built directly by cartel treasurers. It gives us something more believable and more invasive. Homes, lots, mortgages, improvements, refinances, nominee buyers, lawyers, brokers, title work, and small acts of professional silence. Construction was not always a cartel boss funding a tower. Sometimes it was a drug-funded house getting a pool. A lot is being prepared for a dream home. A property improved, borrowed against, and folded into another transaction. Dirty cash did not always build monuments. Sometimes it built a normal life with a false name. Another property case shows a different angle. A Miami house had been improved through a construction loan before federal agents arrested a man there during an attempted cocaine deal with undercover officers. The court treated the property as having helped facilitate narcotics activity while preserving the interest of an innocent spouse. That distinction matters. The cocaine economy did not enter real estate through one doorway. It used houses as assets, meeting places, storage points, collateral, status symbols, hideouts, and tools. Ordinary domestic space became part of an extraordinary market. Behind some doors, the American dream and the cocaine trade were sitting at the same table. Then there were the trophies, the assets big enough to become legend. Pablo Escobar's Miami Beach mansion was seized by United States Marshals in 1987, along with nearly $20 million of Medellín Cartel, Florida real estate assets. That does not prove Escobar built Miami. It proves something more precise. South Florida property was valuable enough, useful enough, and safe enough to become part of a cartel fortune. The mansion was not the whole beast. It was the visible tooth. The larger body moved through houses, bank accounts, shell companies, boats, cars, lots, checks, mortgages, and professional hands that knew how not to tremble. But money was only half the story. The other half was fear. On July 11th, 1979, around 2:30 in the afternoon, gunmen entered Crown Liquors at Dadeland Mall. This was not a dock at midnight, not a hidden road, not some secret airstrip. This was a shopping center, a temple of errands and air conditioning. Automatic weapons opened fire. German Jimenez Paneso, a major Colombian trafficking figure, was killed. His bodyguard, Juan Carlos Hernandez, was killed too. The attack became known as the Dadeland Massacre, and Miami understood something in that moment. The new economy had brought its own language. That language was gunfire. Dadeland was not just a murder scene. It was a market signal. In legal business, disputes go to court. In the cocaine trade, there is no judge to enforce a shipment contract. No polite lawsuit over stolen kilos. No customer service desk for unpaid debt. Violence becomes the contract. Murder becomes the invoice. A public assassination in a crowded mall told everyone watching that wholesale cocaine disputes in South Florida could be enforced with military-style spectacle. The bullets were not random noise. They were a message written across glass, liquor bottles, and the city's nervous system. And once that message was understood, Miami's image split in two. On one side, the city sold sunlight, ocean, and glamour. On the other hand, the homicide numbers climbed. Dade County's violent crime had nearly doubled between 1975 and 1979. A later grand jury report said the homicide rate had risen by nearly 100% in 1980 compared with 1978, and that the homicide rate where victims were Latino had increased by 300% over 6 years. Growth and terror were no longer separate stories. The same river that carried cash also carried bodies, suspicion, and political panic. This is where Griselda Blanco enters the room, not as a myth, but as a warning about myth. Popular culture loves a single monster. It is easier to blame a queen of cocaine than to understand a whole economy of fear. Blanco was real, ruthless, and central to the era's memory. She was convicted in federal court for conspiracy to manufacture, import, and distribute cocaine and received a 15-year sentence. Later, Florida proceedings linked her to murders. Investigators and journalists placed her network near the center of the early cocaine wars. But the exact number of killings attached to her name is not a clean courtroom ledger. That distinction does not make her less important. It makes the story more honest. Blanco became emblematic because she represented the logic of the trade at its cruelest. Debts enforced by death, couriers disciplined by fear, rivals removed, reputations built with bodies. The cocaine market did not need monsters to function, but it rewarded people willing to become them. That is why the legend stuck. Miami did not only remember her because she was violent. Miami remembered her because she showed what happened when money, exile, ambition, betrayal, and murder all learned to move through the same streets. But the violence also distorted the way people talked about belonging. The grand jury record not only described the crime, it fused crime with immigration politics, especially the Mariel boat lift. That matters. Panic spreads sideways. Drug violence becomes a talk about race. Crime becomes a topic of discussion when it comes to migrants. Fear starts asking who belongs in the city, and the answer often falls hardest on people already carrying history on their backs. Miami's cocaine era was not only a criminal crisis, it was a political fever. It changed policing, reputation, neighborhood life, and the way entire communities were seen by people who preferred simple enemies to complicated truth. So when someone says cocaine money helped Miami grow, the next question is, helped whom? Some bankers gained deposits, some brokers gained buyers, some lawyers gained clients, some contractors gained work, some sellers found cash-rich purchasers who did not negotiate like normal people. But ordinary residents paid in other currencies: fear, sirens, suspicion, heavier policing, funerals, and the feeling that their city was being narrated by outsiders as a tropical crime scene. A place can become richer looking and more wounded at the same time. Miami in the 80s was not simply booming, it was swelling. And swelling can be mistaken for strength until you realize it is also a symptom. Now follow the route backward across the water. The phrase people sometimes confuse as Lehder's Bahama Island points to Carlos Lehder's Norman's Cay in the Exumas. Not the Little Bahama Bank, which is a geographic marine shelf, not a laundering bank with tellers and vaults. Norman's Cay was the island with the airstrip, the legend with a runway. From early 1978 through 1981, Lehder's organization used it as a major operating base. Cocaine flew from Colombia to the Bahamas in loads of 150 to 500 kilograms, then moved toward Florida and South Georgia in smaller aircraft. Norman's Cay feels mythical because islands invite mythology. A strip of land in blue water, planes descending from the heat, armed men. Fear travels faster than the law, but the deeper story is logistics. Geography was the true accomplice. The Bahamas is not one island. It is hundreds of islands and cays scattered across a vast marine maze near Florida. A plane could move where a road could not. A boat could vanish into sunlight. Remote cays handled movement. Commercial centers like Nassau and Freeport handled services, paperwork, vehicles, boats, houses, and respectability. The airstrip and the office desk were part of the same sentence. The Bahamas mattered for another reason: sovereignty. Even when United States prosecutors secured convictions, assets overseas were not automatically theirs to seize. Bahamian law, courts, cooperation, and politics mattered. Offshore space slowed the state down. That was part of its value. In the late 1980s, the Bahamian government strengthened asset seizure laws because the old tools were too slow and cumbersome. So the islands were not just scenery in Miami's cocaine drama. They were changed by it. The same narco economy that stained Miami banks pressured Bahamian policing, courts, neighborhoods, and governance. The ghost had footprints on both shores. Back in Miami, the law had to admit it was chasing a creature it did not yet understand. The Bank Secrecy Act required reports for large cash transactions and certain cross-border currency movements, but there were blind spots big enough to fly through. Wire transfers, bank drafts, cashier's checks, and other instruments were not all treated the same way. Banks were often reluctant to alert law enforcement. Penalties were weak. Agencies did not always share information well. Traffickers did not need to defeat the law in a grand battle. They only needed to move through the spaces the law had not learned to see. President Ronald Reagan's South Florida Task Force, announced in January of 1982, marked the moment Miami's crisis became a national emergency. By November of that year, federal officials were claiming more arrests, more seizures, more cocaine taken, more marijuana taken, and drugs seized with a street value of more than $3 billion. Those numbers sounded like victory, but listen under them. A seizure number measures motion. It does not always measure control. You can catch more fish and still discover the ocean is larger than you imagined. The task force showed federal muscle. It also revealed how resilient the trade had become. By 1990, federal reviewers were still describing the Bahamas as a principal route. Even more revealing, cocaine prices in Miami had fallen by about half between 1985 and 1988, from around $32,000 per kilogram to around $16,000. In drug market language, a falling price does not suggest scarcity. It suggests supply is still abundant. Enforcement had made routes riskier. It had forced adaptations. It had broken some networks and punished some players. But the river did not stop. It learned new channels. Miami did not defeat cocaine with one task force. It entered a long war with money that could be used to study. Then came one of the great legal turning points, the Money Laundering Control Act of 1986. For the first time, money laundering itself became a federal crime directly. Structuring transactions to avoid currency reports became a crime. Forfeiture tools grew stronger. Banks were pushed toward compliance. This mattered because Miami's old schemes had been built around gaps: deposits broken under $10,000, cashier's checks, nominees, layered transfers, and professionals who claimed not to know what everyone in the room could smell. After 1986, the game changed. It did not end. It became more careful. That is the mistake people make when they imagine the Cocaine Cowboy era as a story with credits at the end. The gunmen fade, the speedboats get seized, the kingpins go to prison, the television show ends. But money does not end like that. Money learns. Money hires better lawyers. Money stops arriving in bags and starts arriving through layered companies, quiet wires, trade schemes, real estate vehicles, and professional enablers who never see the product and never hear the shots. The violence became less theatrical. The financial logic survived. Hide ownership, convert value, cross borders, reappear clean. That ritual outlived the neon. So did cartel money build Miami? No, not alone, not literally, not in the childish way. Miami had older roots, indigenous memory, Bahamian labor, black neighborhoods, Cuban exile, legitimate Latin American capital, tourism, trade, taxes, land speculation, and a long hunger for reinvention. But did cocaine money accelerate and distort Miami's transformation? Yes. The evidence left behind says yes. It moved through banks, cashier's checks, lawyer accounts, nominee buyers, homes, lots, mortgages, offshore routes, and closing tables. It amplified sectors already primed for growth, especially international banking, high-end residential property, land speculation, and construction-related services. The skyline, then, is not a confession carved in concrete. It is more like a mirror with fingerprints on it. Some fingerprints are legal, some are not. Some belong to families who arrived with savings and hope. Some belong to workers who built in the heat and are at risk. Some belong to bankers who looked away. Some belong to traffickers who wanted their money to stop running. The danger is not that every building is guilty. The danger is that the city became comfortable with money whose origin was hard to see. And once a place becomes comfortable with hidden ownership, it is hard to make it uncomfortable again. This is where the old story becomes the modern one. Miami kept selling the future. After the cocaine years, the pitch changed clothes, luxury towers, tax advantages, finance, technology, crypto dreams, global capital, sunshine as a business plan. The city did not need the same gunfire to remain attractive to opaque money. It already had the old ingredients: cross-border networks, real estate hunger, professional services, and a culture fluent in reinvention. That does not mean modern investors are cartel ghosts. It means the lesson of the 80s remained in the architecture of suspicion. Miami had shown the world how easily money could arrive with no clear past and still be welcomed as progress. And below the glass, there is another Miami, the one tourists do not always film. Overtown was once a great black cultural district, alive with music, nightlife, and community, before highways and redevelopment cut through it like a blade. Liberty City carried its own history of survival, policing, poverty, and resilience. These places are not side notes to the Miami story. They are the bill. They remind us that cities do not only rise through capital, they rise through displacement, labor, memory, and the quiet endurance of people who are rarely invited to the ribbon cutting. A skyline can cast a very long shadow. The people who raise the towers are often not the people who live in them. Miami's construction economy has long depended on immigrant labor from Latin America and the Caribbean, people working in the heat, under deadlines, at risk, and sometimes in silence. A worker can spend years lifting the dream into the sky and still live miles from the view being sold. That is not separate from the cartel story. It is part of the same moral geography. Money arrives clean or dirty, legal or hidden, speculative or sincere, and the city asks labor to give it a body. Someone always carries the concrete. Even the ground is changing the story. Miami sits on porous limestone, a stone sponge under the city's feet. You cannot simply build a wall and command the water to obey, because water can rise through the rock itself. King tides already remind the city that the ocean does not respect brochures. And here comes the old irony. Some inland neighborhoods that have historically been neglected or marginalized sit on higher ground. Land once ignored becomes desirable because it is drier. Climate does not erase inequality. It rearranges the battlefield. The same city that once sold waterfront glamour now looks inland with hungry eyes. The Surfside condominium collapse in June of 2021 was not a cartel story. It was not a cocaine story, but it belongs to the same larger landscape of confidence and denial. A beachfront building came down in the night, killing 98 people. After years of warnings, deterioration, and questions about design, construction, loading, and maintenance. It reminded the city that property is not magic. A view is not a guarantee. A luxury address does not make concrete immortal. Miami's beauty is real, but beauty is not a building inspection. Beauty is not a seawall. Beauty is not proof that the foundation is telling the truth. That is why the cashier's check still haunts this story. It is small enough to ignore and powerful enough to explain the whole machine. The gun announces itself. The cashier's check whispers. It says, "Do not look backward." It says, "The bank has blessed me." It says, "This house is innocent now." It says, "This lot has no memory." But cities remember through strange objects: court records, forfeiture papers, old homicide files, bank reports, closing documents, street names, seawater rising through drains. Miami's confession was never going to be one dramatic admission. It was always going to be scattered through receipts. The pop culture version gave us pastel suits, speedboats, mansions, and beautiful violence. It made the cocaine era look like a fever dream under neon. But the real history is more unsettling because it is less exotic. It happened in banks, law offices, suburban homes, shopping centers, airports, Ks, title companies, and family neighborhoods. It happened through people who made choices that looked small at the time. Accept the deposit, issue the check, sign the deed, backdate the lease, ignore the bag, file nothing, ask nothing. And step by step, a city already hungry for money learned that some money arrives with ghosts attached. So the answer is not that cartels built Miami. The answer is that Miami was already a machine for transformation, and cocaine money found the machine. It entered as cash and came out as property. It entered as violence and came out as policy. It entered as panic and came out as reputation. It entered through islands and banks and homes and left behind a city more glamorous, more suspicious, and more difficult to read. Cartel money did not create Miami's soul, but for a crucial decade, it pressed its thumb into the clay while the city was still shaping its modern face. And maybe that is what makes Miami so powerful as a story. It is not fake, it is real, and that is worse for anyone hoping for an easy moral. Real families built lives there, real workers raised towers, real communities survived neglect, real criminals laundered fortunes, real bankers looked away, real blood hit the floor at Dadeland, real paper crossed real closing tables. The city is not one thing, it is sunlight and shadow at the same time. A paradise that learned to sell reinvention while trying not to ask what some people were reinventing themselves from. So next time you see Miami from above, all glass and water and perfect angles, remember the view from the closing table. Remember the cashier's check. Remember how quiet, dirty money can become when enough respectable hands touch it. The gunfire made the headlines, but the paperwork may have done the deeper magic. Thank you immensely. I appreciate you for trekking the hidden trails of Latin America with me. If tonight's story unsettled you, subscribe and ring the bell, because Latin America's most intriguing stories are far from over.